The Federative Republic of Brazil is situated on the South American continent. It is the world's fifth largest country in terms of size and population. Its size and dynamic landscape provides the nation with many economic opportunities. In 2012, Brazil overtook the United Kingdom to become the world's sixth largest economy. Brazil is second to Australia in iron ore exportation, and their major exports include coffee, beef, soybeans, sugar, and orange juice. The diversity of the Brazilian people is largely a reflection of the country's colonial past. Brazil's indigenous population was colonized by the European country of Portugal in the 16th century, and the Portuguese brought with them slaves from India and West Africa. Whilst Brazil achieved its independence in 1862, the Portuguese continued to immigrate to Brazil, along with many others. Brazil is home to a large Italian, German, and Japanese community, as well as populations from Brazil's numerous neighboring countries. Data from Brazil's 2011 census suggests that there are over 3.1 million Brazilians overseas, with roughly half of those living in the United States. However, the improving economy is seeing more and more people stay at home. This isn't the case with students, though. University, which was out of reach for many because of the cost, is now an option, and reports show that 250,000 Brazilians were studying overseas in 2011. Besides the United States, Brazilians' favorite places to travel are reported to be Buenos Aires, London, Paris, Rome, and Santiago. They also come to Australia. The latest Australian census recorded over 147,000 Brazilian-born people in Australia. As well, Brazilians are the sixth most common nationality representing international students. Brazil's melting pot culture has arguably had the largest impact on the country's cuisine. The colonization and continued immigration has created a very worldly palate. Despite the global flavors found in Brazilian food, the mainstay of the Brazilian diet is rice and beans. Brazilians are said to feel like they haven't eaten unless they've had their rice and beans. Manioc flour is also widely consumed. The flour is made from a tuber vegetable which is native to South America. It's commonly known as cassava or yuca. So what does a typical day of eating in Brazil look like? Well, generally, Brazilians have similar eating patterns to Australians. They have a morning tea and afternoon tea and usually have 3 meals a day. Breakfast is kept light and usually always consists of coffee, as breakfast in Portuguese literally means morning coffee. They'll also have some sort of baked good. Fruit is also very popular, and it's very plentiful in Brazil. Because of the heavy consistency of traditional meals, lunch is the largest meal of the day. The national dish, known as feijoada, is most often consumed on a Saturday afternoon, allowing for a post-meal nap. It's said to have been created by African slaves who created a stew to make the most out of the cheaper cuts of meat they were provided. The dish has evolved, though, and is now actually a family of dishes, each with a slight variation according to regional differences and personal tastes. Dinner, like breakfast, is also kept light, and it usually consists of a soup or a salad, beans and rice, or a pasta. Being one of the top sugar producers, everyone in Brazil enjoys a sweet treat, and traditional Brazilian coffee and desserts are often thought to be exceedingly sweet by foreigners. Brazilians will eat both sweet and savory items for their morning and afternoon tea, and then chase it with the coffee. Geographic regions also play a part in what people eat. While different ethnicities settle in different areas, the food is a product of its environment and what is seasonally available. The Central West and South is home to the country's cattle industry, and they consume a lot of beef and milk. And in the Southeast, people eat more French bread, pasta, and cheese. Brazilians who live in rural areas consume more staple traditional Brazilian foods as opposed to new processed foods, and the food they get is generally better quality compared to their urban counterparts. Along with food, the Portuguese also brought with them a strong Catholic faith. This religious following has meant that many of the country's traditions stem from Catholicism. Easter is celebrated in Brazil, with fish traditionally being eaten on Good Friday. The Brazilians have adopted the Portuguese tradition of eating salted cod, and even though its demand has made it quite expensive, the sentimental value of it means that people do find a place for it in their budget. Chocolate eggs can also be found. However, Brazilians have their own traditional Easter sweet called pacoca de amendoim, and it is made from peanuts, sugar, and you guessed it, manioc flour. Like Australia, being south of the equator, Brazilians will often start their Christmas celebrations with a big barbecue. They eat their main meal Christmas Eve. Wealthier families will often eat a Christmas dinner that's similar to our Christmas dinner, with a ham or turkey and a selection of side dishes, whilst families with less money will stick with more traditional fare like chicken, rice, and beans. So we've discussed a bit about Brazil, but what happens when Brazil comes to us? As you have probably gathered, food is pretty important to Brazilians. However, when they move overseas, sometimes it can be a big change. Moving to Australia is probably not so bad, as we're a meat-loving country with a tropical climate, like Brazil. However, not all the traditional Brazilian ingredients are available fresh in Australia. For example, you cannot buy fresh acai or cassava from the supermarkets, although some Asian food shops and market stalls may sell it. Australia's Irish background has meant that the potato is our root vegetable of choice. However, sweet potatoes or yams can be a good substitute for cassava, and you can buy dried acai. Manioc flour made from cassava is also not commonly sold, but it can be found as tapioca starch in most specialty shops. Australia's burgeoning foodie scene is also helping Brazilians find their most loved foods. Foods and even appliances can be ordered online, albeit at a cost. However, the number of these type of import sites is growing, indicating that the demand is there. Brazilian expats are also taking advantage of Australia's love of barbecues and are sharing their fare at local markets. There are also at least 5 Brazilian restaurants throughout Brisbane City, each using traditional methods to prepare food. So while Brazilians may not be able to enjoy their large leisurely lunches during the weekend is a great time for a cook-up. Looking at the nutrition aspect of the Brazilian diet, while both Australia and Brazil have food-based guidelines, there are some differences. The Brazilian guidelines prescribe complex carbs, but they make no reference to whole grains. This is different to the Australian guidelines that emphasize whole grains consist of 2/3 of the grain intake. The Brazilian diet also consumes more beans and legumes as a diet staple compared to Australians, and recommends less meat. They also recommend to consume more fruit than Australians, though we are recommended to eat double the vegetable intake as they do. Brazil's most recent nutrition guidelines are receiving a lot of international attention for their positive, holistic approach to food consumption. They consist of 10 recommendations that advocate for things like sharing meals, cooking from scratch, and being critical of advertised foods. Interestingly, though, and unlike Australia, they make no mention of the importance of breastfeeding, and Brazil has a relatively good rate of breastfeeding compared with Australia. In 2012, Brazil reports showed that 41% of women were still breastfeeding at 6 months, compared to Australia's 15%. Another difference between the two countries is that in Brazil, people of a low socioeconomic status appear to have better diets, as they stick to simpler, more traditional ways of eating. Despite Brazil's guidelines and recommendations, research has found that the average consumption of fruits and vegetables is still only half the amount of recommended, with the consumption of ultra-processed foods such as sweets and soft drinks rapidly increasing. This is also true across Australia. As well, like Australia, the Brazilian diet has been influenced by urbanization and globalization. There has been a shift away from regular consumption of home-cooked foods towards ultra-processed foods. While there's been a major social transformation in Brazil in the last 10 years, with poverty and social exclusion being reduced, there has been a steep increase in obesity in all segments of the population. This is thought to be associated with a national shift away from traditional foods towards processed, high-energy dense foods and a lack of fruit, vegetables, and beans. In Australia, the burden of disease is largely due to poor nutrition associated with similar unhealthy food choices. Both countries are struggling with cardiovascular diseases, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and cancer. While these facts are kind of depressing, Brazil is moving from strength to strength, and with a culture with such a rich history, we are hopeful that they will continue to value food and take steps to better nutrition. Thanks for listening.